Tonight is the night that I expose the Georgia Bulldogs on this episode of How About That DawgsCast. And you might wonder exactly what I'm talking about. And I posted this preview, this leader for what this show is going to be about several days in advance, which is something that I usually don't do, but I decided to do it this time because I wanted to give people an opportunity to see it and maybe digest it a little bit. Because if you come here, you know that I try to shoot you straight. I try to call it like I see it and not sugarcoat anything. But this is a Georgia Bulldogs channel. We focus on football. And in the case of Georgia over the last few years, there's an awful lot of positive to talk about. So people who don't live in our community, who don't visit the site and the page often, they breeze through and think that it's simply a Pollyanna page, a Pollyanna channel, where all we do is sunshine and rainbows. That's not the case. There are instances with any team where they have an opportunity to get exposed, and that comes in different forms. In the lead up to the show, I saw some people bantering back and forth, and on a couple of other podcasts where I had some friends mention that they thought tonight I was going to sit here and lay out for you the weaknesses in this 2024 Georgia Bulldogs football team, but that's not exactly what we're going to do. There are points where the Dogs could be better. They need to be better if they're actually going to achieve all the goals that they want to achieve this year. But what I want to do is look at the schedule as a whole. Over the last couple of weeks, we've taken a look at the schedule individually and broken down which games I was most excited about, which games gets everyone attention. We've sort of cursorily gone through it and talked about how the various players need to show up in these games. But tonight, what I want to do is take a look at the schedule by chunks. And when you break it out that way, there is a particular section of games that I think are actually going to be a crucible for the Georgia Bulldogs in 2024. Now, you saw it on the screen right there. What is a crucible? It's a severe test. It's the sort of thing where once you go in there and you come out on the other side, you are not the same. You might be better, you might be worse, but you're not going to be the same. And I think when you look at the Georgia schedule in 2024, there is an absolute bookmark set of games that define the crucible of the season for the Dogs that will determine whether or not Georgia can actually do everything that the larger college football world believes they are capable of doing this season. And that is win an SEC championship and win a national championship. So when you look across the schedule, we start, of course, with Clemson. Now, that's a big game. I spoke about it a couple of weeks back. I'm really excited for that game. And we're going to learn a lot about the teams in week one because it's going to be the first time we see them. I think we're probably going to learn more about Georgia than we do Clemson in that game. But you could argue that either way. But I don't think that's where we're going to start this month of games that's going to determine actually who the Dogs are. We got some more news this week. We learned that Kentucky was going to be a 7:30 kickoff on the Bluegrass this year, but I don't think Kentucky falls into this window either. We talked earlier in the year about, of course, how much I dislike Florida. And I always want to see us beat Florida. But even with all that weighing on my mind, I couldn't put Florida in that set of games. And if you look at the back end of the season, you have Ole Miss on the road, which was a house of horrors the last time Kirby Smart led a Georgia Bulldogs team in there. And you have a Tennessee team that is going to be the best volunteer team under Josh Heupel so far. But I don't think that ending stretch is where it's at either. I think the games not too far into the season, beginning with Alabama and ending with a road trip to Texas, 2 road trips in the toughest conference in the country, against two teams that were in the college football playoff just a season ago, that is going to be what tells us everything we need to know about this Georgia team. So let's start right there. Let's break them down one by one. If it's Alabama, there's certain things that when we're talking about them going into this season, there's a couple of things you just have to tick off right off the top, because obviously it's Alabama. There's plenty to say there about the recent history, but it's not the same Alabama. Now, you know that I'm not one of those people that's going to sit here and tell you that Alabama's about to fall off the table. They're going to be different. I didn't say they weren't going to be really good. I didn't say that I'm expecting 5 losses for that squad. I'm saying it's going to be different. They have new blood. They have a new coaching staff. They have new players in key positions. Kalen DeBoer takes over at Alabama for the legendary Nick Saban. Now, we've heard all sorts of stories all spring about the way he's implementing what it is he's doing and why he's doing it that way, and how much he's still leaning on Nick and getting direction when he has a question about how things are going to go. Alabama's had to be active in the portal this year, probably more so than they have been in recent years. Our Alabama fans can correct me on that. I'm not following them that closely. But it seems like they've been busier in the portal, getting players and losing a few. It's not going to be the same team. But there's absolutely no doubt that when the schedule came out, this was the game that everyone pointed to. Shoot, it's the game I pointed to as the one I was most excited and looking forward to here in 2024. I think the fact that it begins this really, really defining series of games for the Dogs only adds to why I put it in that number one position as the game I'm most excited about. It's going to get everyone's attention. It's going to be prime time at night in T-Town. Just think about the recent history. Think about the classic matchups that these two teams have had. Think about the amount of talent that's going to be on the field in this game. I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to touch on it again here. Go back and watch the previous video if you want to hear more about it. But this game is going to be a big game for the head coaches as well as the fan bases and the teams, because it's a big game for DeBoer, because this is going to be his entrance into the conference. He's never coached football down here in the Deep South. And the game that welcomes him into this league is only the team that's won 2 out of the last 3 national championships, the Georgia Bulldogs. That's going to be his welcoming mat. That's going to be who's knocking on the door in the evening and saying, anybody home? So Alabama is going to be the game that kicks off this stretch for Georgia. Now, it's not only the fact that Georgia has to go on the road to play Alabama. There's a little bit more to it than that. And one of the things we have to consider is these are always moving parts, right? Georgia's going to be a moving process. We're going to be learning about the Dogs as we get that deep into the season. Alabama's going to be learning about their team. But of course, as much as we would like to think that this is an Xbox world and the only thing that happens inside the beginning whistle and the ending whistle in the game when the clock hits zeros, that's not exactly true. Like I said, there are forces outside that are going to be impacting everything that happens in this game. So we have to look at those too. And one of those things is, of course, who are they playing when they're not playing Georgia? Well, who do they play immediately prior? They happen to have a bye week. So does Georgia. So let's call that a wash. But look at the game before that. Even though this is going to be their first game in the SEC, even though this is arguably the marquee game of their season, they are also going to have the advantage of having gone on the road and played a Wisconsin team in a hostile environment. Now, you might say none of that's directly going to correlate to this game. They're at home. They're going to have the home field advantage. But they are going to see a quality opponent. The question that maybe we haven't taken time to consider yet is, at this point in the season, are coaches going to be holding anything back, knowing that they have bigger conference games coming down the line? So if Alabama's on the road at Wisconsin, Is there anything? Do they have the luxury in this new offense that everyone is still going to be learning and adjusting to? Do they have the luxury of holding things back as a surprise for the Georgia Bulldogs when they roll in on September 28th? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. You know they're going to have a wrinkle or two for sure. Every team does. They always will. And they're going to do what they think gives them the best chance to beat Georgia. But if they're fighting for their lives on the road in the Big Ten against Wisconsin, of course they're going to pull out everything they have to do to try to get that win. So more than that, I understand Wisconsin's changing their offense under Luke Fickell. I understand that they're not the ground and pound of Barry Alvarez from my youth, but that is still a Big Ten football team with quality football players. It will not be an easy game for the Crimson Tide as they prepare to come home, win or lose, lick their wounds, and then get ready to host Georgia. So if we're going to look at Alabama, we have to look at Georgia. Who does Georgia play the week before? Well, like I said, we're on the road taking on Kentucky. That game is going to be a night game. So you have to take into consideration the schedule as well. Thankfully, the Alabama game, 2 weeks removed, of course, is also going to be a night game, but the Dogs will have some experience playing a night game under the bright lights. They will know what it's like to go on the road and spend a day at the hotel or going through walkthroughs or whatever that is to get their minds right before the game. These are all things that we have to consider, but it's all things that Georgia is going to have to be working through, just like Alabama is going to have to be working through their stuff. And that's just a couple of the reasons that I think this is the point in the season that kicks off that stretch run that's really going to tell us everything we need to know about Georgia. Will they be able to go into a hostile environment led by their second-year quarterback, led by a veteran offensive line, and get a win on the road against a team that in recent history, they have had a difficult time besting? They're going to get to do it against Kentucky the week before. They're going to have the same opportunity, but are we actually going to sit here in May, grant you, and say that going to Kentucky is the same thing as going to Tuscaloosa? I'm not going to say that. No disrespect to Kentucky. They've improved their team. They think they're in a good spot up there. But let's be real here. That's not the same thing. It just simply isn't. So the Dogs are going to go play Kentucky. They're going to have their internal clocks oriented. So I'm thankful for that. But Kentucky, as I spent a lot of last year talking about, is a team that traditionally is a very physical game for Georgia. One of the most physical on the Dogs schedule. So Georgia on the road at night for a hyped up Kentucky team, playing against some guys that they lined up with last year. Remember, there are a couple of Dogs that are on Kentucky squad this year that are going to be starters for the Wildcats. So there's the emotions of dealing with that. Some of this stuff may sound like I'm overblowing it just a little bit, but I don't intend to overblow it. I'm just saying these are things that are going to factor in. That's why I started this crucible here with the Alabama game. So who's on Georgia's schedule after Alabama? We're going to stay in the state, and we're going to take on the Auburn Tigers, but we get them in Athens. So yes, Auburn and Alabama are in the same state, but the Tigers have to come to Athens. And the last time Auburn rolled in to play between the hedges, Georgia put a whipping on them. In fact, the recent history of this series is Georgia has sort of ruled the roost when it came to the Tigers. They've tamed them. The thing about Auburn this season, I guess you could say it's the same as last season, because all they did last year was go out early in the season and lose a game they shouldn't lose, and then take both Georgia and Alabama right to the wire when everybody thought that wouldn't really be the case. So they were a little schizo last year. I think in 24, it's going to be very much the same script for the Auburn Tigers. I think they are going to be one of the most volatile teams in the SEC. It's because of the situation that Hugh Freeze took over when he got there. He had to rebuild the roster. And the way he's doing that to try to make up ground inside an ever-changing conference is thanks to the transfer portal. And more power to him. Now, he is out there recruiting and doing a good job. But in this offseason, they decided they didn't want to pay to upgrade their quarterback. That's what it is. Let's call it what it is. They didn't want to pay to upgrade the quarterback. But what they did is took that money and tried to get better at a lot of other positions. And what that means is that Auburn is going to be playing a lot of young players. So 1 week, they're going to show up and you're going to see, yeah, Auburn got their money's worth. Those are good young players. And you're going to hear the Auburn people start to get fired up. And then they're going to look at the rest of the schedule and understand that young players are going to give you those kind of performances, but then they're also going to go out and just wet the bed. You don't know when it's going to happen. But the bottom line is, we saw when Georgia played Auburn last year that schematically, Hugh Freeze, he's able to throw a pretty good curveball when it comes to facing a Kirby Smart and a Glenn Schumann defense. Now he's got a few more pieces to work with. So even though this game's in Athens, it's going to be the kind of game that is going to test everything that young Georgia defense is working on still early in the year. How many times have you heard me say that I think the offense is going to be ahead of the defense to start the season? They're going to provide air cover while the defense finds its feet and learns their way around the field in hopes of becoming what I think could end up being a very, very good defense by the end of the year. But early in the year, those young players that are going to be playing for Georgia's defense, the young linebackers, those young DBs that haven't had that many snaps yet, they're going to roll in and have to play, or they're going to face an Auburn team who runs a scheme with a lot of misdirection and demands superb eye control to be effective against. That's the hardest thing for any young defender to do, is manage where their eyes are supposed to be on any given play. So even though at this point, we're 4 or 5 games into the schedule, they're still learning. And now you got this guy calling plays, sending the ball all sorts of directions. It's going to be a tough game for those young players. I'm not saying that Auburn's going to come in and upset Georgia. I'm saying that from a train of thought process, you've done things a certain way the first 3-4 weeks of the season, and now you see this sort of offense, and maybe they get you once or twice. Maybe they hit you for a big play because your eyes are in the wrong place, or maybe you just make a mistake because you're a young player, and Auburn's in the game on the road because now they have a couple more weapons on the offensive side of the ball. They can actually throw the ball down the field, and before you know it, you get in the third quarter, and this is more interesting than you thought it was going to be. Could be the case. But even if Georgia handles their business, what it's going to do in terms of preparation, how Georgia's going to have to prep for this game is going to be different than the way they're going to be prepping for Kentucky or for Alabama earlier, because they don't do what Auburn does. And that is a key part of this middle stretch of games here. What's going on with Georgia? If we go ahead and take a look at Auburn's schedule, right? Because remember, I said it's not just who Georgia's playing when they're playing them. It's who the opponent is playing and when they're playing them. So let's look at Auburn. Who do they have the week before Georgia? They have the Oklahoma Sooners. Now, I have questions about Oklahoma's offense right now for a couple of different reasons, primarily the offensive line. I still want to see their young quarterback and see if he's the real deal. I've been assured by Oklahoma people that they are going to be better than maybe I'm giving them credit for. Awesome. That's who Auburn has to play the week before. But Auburn's at home. But I think OU may not be on the same level as Texas as they enter the Southeastern Conference, but those are still top-tier football players on that team. That is a top-flight program. And that is going to be a cat fight for the Auburn Tigers when they take on Oklahoma, even though they have them at home. And then Auburn has to turn around and welcome in Georgia, who has just punched their ticket over the last 15, 20 years. So if I had to look at it, I don't know that I can give Georgia the straight up advantage there, because let's take a look here. Georgia has Alabama, and then the next week, I can't give Georgia the advantage because they're squaring off against one of the most physical teams they're going to play all year in the Alabama Crimson Tide. So both of those teams are going to come together in Athens, having played a physical game the week before. This is the point in the season, early October, where you might start to have an injury situation pop up. Maybe you're down an offensive lineman. Maybe a wide receiver or a corner has pulled a hamstring or something, and now you're shifting people around a little bit. That's why this game can be tricky. And it's why I put it square in the middle of the key 4 games for Georgia in the season. So that tells you, if we're moving right along in this 4-game stretch, Mississippi State is up next for Georgia, and they are also going to be coming to Athens. So you would think advantage Georgia. I mean, why wouldn't you say that? Sanford Stadium is a wonderful place to watch a game, and over the last few years, Dog Nation has really stepped up their game and made Sanford a less than hospitable place to visit. So Mississippi State is rolling in, having essentially scrapped everything that they've been over the last 5-6 years. And certainly everything that they were last year, because they had a first-time head coach last year who lasted only 1 season. And now they've turned everything over again and brought in Jeff Lebby, offensive mastermind, to lead Mississippi State into the new era of the Southeastern Conference. So what do we know about Jeff Lebby? Just that he was at Oklahoma. So all you have to do is just go back and look at what they've been doing on offense the last couple of years to get an idea of what Mississippi State's going to try to do. They're going to run the ball on the stretch, and then they're going to throw the ball to grass. They're going to send their wide receivers to space, and they're going to try to hit you off of that stretch play. A little 1-2 punch. I mean, that's what I'm imagining. So we know what they're going to try to do. The question is, do they have the roster to get it done? And how does that fall in line against what Georgia's doing? Now, I can sit here and tell you that I know what Jeff Lebby's going to do, or that I know how this game's going to play out. And even though I have a pretty good idea that Georgia should win the game, I can't sit here and tell you exactly how much trouble Mississippi State is going to give Georgia. Because just like Auburn, even though Auburn is a little screwy in what they do and the way they hide the football, if you will, with motions and things like that, Mississippi State doesn't do that, but they are not just a line up and pound it at you sort of offense either. Certainly not in the I formation. Like I said, they like to run that spread play and then play action off of it and get their guys out in space. So you go from Kentucky and Alabama, if you're a Georgia player, Kentucky and Alabama, which are going to be 2 very physical, slobber-knocker kind of games, to take on a very volatile curveball of a team in Auburn at home. The main advantage for Georgia here is that you get Mississippi State at home, so it's not like you have to add travel into this thing. But everything that Mississippi State puts on tape up to this point, you're going to be seeing it for the first time, essentially. And it's not what you had seen the week prior in Auburn. So there's enough mystery around what's going on at Mississippi State here for me to not really hesitate at all to put them right in the middle here and not see them as a weak link in this run of games for Georgia. There's just too much we don't know about what the Bulldogs are going to be. The Mississippi State Bulldogs, just for clarification. Again, Georgia should win the game. They should win the game handily. But the mental gymnastics and the preparation, the point in the year we're reaching where everybody's going to be a little dinged up, this is the kind of thing that is going to let us know, does Georgia step up and handle their business the way you would expect a national championship favorite to do? Is that young defense growing and maturing and showing us that they can go out there and handle what should be a Mississippi State offense that's still finding its way. If Georgia's going to be a championship level team, that's how the game will go. They will go out, they'll handle Mississippi State, and that defense will look good doing it. They won't look confused. They won't look like they don't know where they're supposed to be. The offense will start to find its legs in the ground game, and it'll start to turn into a 1-2 pick your poison kind of machine with Carson Beck running it. The running game hopefully is still healthy, and you're knocking off explosive run plays in addition to throwing the ball down the football field in the pass game. If Georgia is right and they think they're going to be able to go all the way, this is the kind of game that is a good barometer for how Georgia handles their business, especially between the ears, because it's the kind of thing that it could be a letdown game. New coach, new staff, rebuilding, we should stomp them. But it's like Kirby says, elite don't get bored. If they are who they believe they are, they will go out and beat Mississippi State 40-10 or something like that. It'll be a machine-like approach. It'll be a workman's job to take down the Bulldogs. So that's game 3 out of this 4-game stretch, which means that we are coming right up to game 4. That has to be the Texas Longhorns. This game came in at number 2 on the games I was most excited to see this year. Now, the thing about Texas, when we first heard that Texas and Oklahoma was coming in to the conference, listen, everybody had their own opinions about it. And I don't mean to be throwing anybody any shade here, but when I heard that Texas and OU were coming, the team that I thought would have the better opportunity to be ready to go in the SEC sooner was the Texas Longhorns, simply because Texas, by their own admission, should be able to go recruit anybody they want to in the state of Texas. They should be able to pick their players and turn everybody else away. That's what Texas should be when they're really good. So I thought at least on that level, at least on the recruiting roster level, Texas might be in a better position to enter the league with a splash than Oklahoma would be. And as it's played out, with Texas coming off a college football playoff appearance, clearly I don't think it's a stretch to say that Texas is in a better position heading into the conference. Now, whether or not you want to say that Texas is on tier 1 inside the conference, that's for you to decide. As for me, I don't have a problem putting Texas on tier 1 as they enter the SEC. The rest of it we'll figure out soon enough when all these teams get together and start playing. But based on roster, based on recent history, based on trajectory, what's returning, all those things, I think Texas is in as good a position as you can be to get ready to come into the league. So just like everybody else, let's step back up here and take a look at who Texas is going to be playing the week before they play Georgia. This is the most interesting matchup for me of these 4 games when it comes to other opponents, because sort of like Georgia, Florida, Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama, Auburn, OU, Texas is the game that really gets the Longhorns going and their fan base. It's the one they want to win. Now, just like in all those other rivalries I mentioned to you, fans are going to have differing opinions about whether or not that game means more than any potential championships, conference or national or otherwise. And there have been periods in the past where fans absolutely answered in the affirmative that beating this rival, not just a rival, but this rival in particular, means more than any of that other stuff. And they would argue that in order to do the other stuff, you have to beat this rival, therefore it's the most important. You can form your own opinions about that, but the bottom line is it's a big deal. And the fact that Texas destroyed Oklahoma a couple of years ago, and then Oklahoma shows up last year and defeats Texas. Well, let's just say this rivalry is nice and hot. And now they're in the conference together. They're going to be playing every year. It's only going to maintain that heat because Oklahoma believes they are on the way back. Texas already believes that they are fully back. And now those two are fighting in the backyard to see who's going to come next door and take on the big boys that were already here inside the Southeastern Conference. So, no doubt, both emotionally and physically, the game before Georgia plays Texas is going to be a game that drains Texas. Will Texas, much like we're asking about Georgia, be able to get that off of their mind? Will Texas be able to refocus? Because at the end of the day, that's what this entire discussion is about. Again, Georgia's going to be playing Mississippi State. Texas is going to be playing Oklahoma. Again, I'm not trying to be dismissive of Mississippi State, but the bottom line is those two things are not the same. And Texas has the advantage of being at home. Georgia does have to go on the road. But when you look at everything in a group, you pull it all together, the type of roster that Texas has, the game they played the previous week, the fact that they're at home and Georgia has to go on the road. When you start to pull it all together, it's clear why this is the kind of game that should bookend the month of games that are going to tell the tale about the 2024 Georgia Bulldogs. Because if you make it through a series of games at Alabama, CFP 2023, you get Auburn and Mississippi State at home, and we already walked through how each of those teams provide challenges for Georgia in different ways. And then you go on the road again in your farthest road trip of the season to play the Texas Longhorns at their place in October when it's still going to be 80 degrees out there or hotter. I don't know the game time for that day, but I doubt it's going to be a nighttime kick. We'll see. I mean, they'd be doing Georgia a favor if it were. But if Georgia could get through Alabama, Auburn, Mississippi State, and Texas and only lose one of those games along the way, even if they lose a game, we're going to know exactly what this Georgia team is as they start to get their ducks in a row to make a run at a potential SEC championship and then into the 12-team playoff to take their shot at a national championship. Because it's like I said off the top, this is one of those situations where when you have a guy like Carson Beck coming back and leading your team, you look at the stretch of games and you think, this is where this cat earns his keep. This is where it makes the difference. If Carson Beck can't step up and lead this team through this stretch, notice I'm not saying he has to go undefeated. I'm just saying lead them through the stretch the way you would expect a second-year quarterback of his caliber to do. If he can't do that, then we've all been wildly misled about how important it was for him to come back. But if he does come back and he navigates this stretch of games with the Dogs and they go 4-0 or 3-1, if he can pull that off, then everyone will be in agreement. I will be saying it louder than most probably, that this is the reason he wanted to come back and show what he's about and what this team is about. Because at the end of the day, we all know that Georgia's playing for championships now. We're not talking about anything else, really. They know where they're supposed to be. And I think they are under no illusions about what it's going to take to get that done. But the way I see it, this is the kind of thing that is going to just have to play itself out before we're going to know for sure. But man, I'm looking forward to it. There are other important games scattered around the schedule, but in my opinion, none are more important than this 4-game stretch. Like I said off the top, we're talking about CRUCIBLE. Look at that definition. A severe test leading to the creation of something new. you are going to learn everything you need to know about the Georgia Bulldogs over the course of this 4-game stretch in the month of October. I, for one, am very excited to see what it looks like. I am not yet ready to start picking games over the course of the season or telling you exactly how I expect it to play out or which games I think Georgia might lose this year. And in a future episode, I might actually get into the weeds a little bit more and talk to you about the other ways I think Georgia can be exposed. But in 2024, this month of games over the course of the month of October is going to expose Georgia. On a macro level, do they have what it takes? We know they have the roster, the quarterback, the coaching staff. Do they have the intangibles, the culture, everything that you need between the ears to get it done? That's what we're going to learn over this course of games. Again, they don't have to go undefeated, but they have to step up and handle their business like a championship team should handle their business. And if they do that, all of Dog Nation is going to say, praise the Lord and go Dogs, because we're going to know that our team is for real and has a real shot to bring home the hardware. And oh, by the way, the national championship game is right down the road in Atlanta in 2025. So how sweet would that be? Cap off 3 championships in 4 years and do it in your own home state. Man, I know Atlanta burned once upon a time, but I can only imagine what would happen if the Dogs were to win a national championship in their own backyard and cap off a 4-year run that has rarely been seen in the world of college football. This 4-game stretch is going to tell us whether or not they can get that done. So there you have it. That is the crucible for the Georgia Bulldogs here in 2024. A 4-game stretch in the month of October that's going to let us know everything we need to know about exactly who the Georgia Bulldogs are and what we can expect on the back half of the season. I'm looking forward to it. I know you are too. So stick around, keep riding with us, and we'll walk you through all of it as it happens. And of course, we're always going to shoot you straight. Y'all take care of yourselves, take care of your friends, take care of your family, and go Dogs!
Told them, how about them fucking dogs? That's what I told them.